Welcome to Load the Box. We got a special guest here tonight. To my, I don't even know what direction he is. That way, Andrew Carlson of Canis Hoopus is joining us. Andrew has been a huge Timberwolves fan for at least 15 years. He's been covering the team in a professional capacity for 3 seasons. Andrew, you're on here to talk some ball, basketball, football, whatever comes up. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well off some pretty big Wolves news that broke about, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds ago. How it always kind of works. It seems like when you're least expecting it, something big comes down, especially when we were just saying that it would maybe happen a little bit later. But I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I can't complain. It's a big night for NBA news, and it's a great night to be joining you fellas to talk some NFL as well.
Awesome. So, like we talked about pre-show, and the title of this episode will tell you as much. What we're going after tonight is looking at the Timberwolves' success, really specifically over the last season, but kind of what brought us to that point, and how the Vikings, across town, um, you know, brother franchise in the same city, how they can learn from the Minnesota Timberwolves in that success. I think it's really important to take things from other scenarios in life, whether it's taking a business example and applying it to a sports franchise, things like that, where you can learn things and then apply it to your specific situation. So that's the angle we wanted to take tonight. So Andrew, I want to start with you. You're the resident Wolves expert here. You've been covering this team. You've been watching this team more than anybody probably should. And so you have a better understanding than really, anybody on what this team did over the last few seasons to get where they got this year, which was a Western Conference Finals appearance, the best season they've had in at least 20 seasons. What do you think were the key ingredients that brought them to where they got this year?
I think you have to start with the hiring of Chris Finch. I mean, that's kind of where things started to turn the corner. Is you hire the right guy, right? I mean, there were so many years where the franchise had, guys like Kurt Rambis, who kind of seems to everything he touches wilt. I mean, you had Rick Adelman, who brought some pretty formidable years, but you get the right guy around the right group of players, and things start to round into form, and that's kind of what happened as soon as Chris Finch took over the bench. You saw it in Anthony Edwards' play almost immediately, and then I think it spiraled into moves on the margins that ended up working favorably. Like you look at the Andrew Wiggins trade. Yes, they attached the pick that turned into Jonathan Kuminga, but you had a player in D'Angelo Russell who gave you really solid guard play. And when you get good guard play in the NBA, that accelerates your franchise and accentuates some of the players around you. You take a player like Anthony Edwards, and he gets better every single year. So clearly, you see something in the player development system that's working. Jaden McDaniels, another success story. Naz Reid, another success story. Guys who were drafted outside of the lottery that have turned into really formidable rotation players. So you get wins on the margins. You make some really good moves that turned over essentially a roster that wasn't winning any games, and got players that were slightly better in those trades. And that's really, when you boil it all down, that's sometimes as easy as that. So it was a few years in the making. They turned an entire roster over. They got the right guy, and then their player that they drafted number one overall and hoped to be their franchise has lived up to those expectations and gotten better every single year. And then what they finally decided to do is when they saw the writing on the wall, they decided to go for it, and mortgage the future per se, the overused maybe cliche term in sports media. But they did it and it worked. And after a season of frankly chaos and lack of continuity, so I think all of those things, it was kind of the perfect storm, and where we find ourselves with the team that just got off of a Western Conference Finals run.
Do you think the key to them taking the leap, them being the Timberwolves, obviously, but do you think the key was those small victories on the margins? Or would you say it was more so just like Anthony Edwards' development into being, number one pick, franchise defining, era defining, possibly? Like, everybody. I get that it was a little over exaggerated when, he had like 3 good games, and everybody was like, he's Michael Jordan. And it was like, whoa, hang on, maybe let's not put him there yet, because I don't think that's fair to Anthony Edwards. That sets the expectations too high. But, like, it seems like he's going to be a problem for a really long time. Do you think he played more into that, or do you think it was more of the smaller behind-the-scenes moves that created a more full team?
Yeah, Jordan, you're dead on. He seems to be a little bit of an issue for the rest of the league, and I think that's kind of a chicken or the egg scenario, because when you look at it, it's, there were moves on the margins that gave you quality role players that won you games around the right talent, but at the same time, you have to surround your young talent with winning players right from the jump. If you recall, with the Timberwolves in the mid 2010s, when you had the young core of Zach LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, and Karl Anthony Towns, that was supposed to be one of the most promising young nucleuses in the league. It never really panned out because there were never really decisive veterans around them that contributed to winning, and brought them and put them in high leverage situations. With Anthony Edwards, I think the opposite is true. I think part of the reason that he is so good today is because the Wolves, from the very jump, outside of his first season when things weren't very good, they made smart moves and brought in players that did very specific things. You look at a Jared Vanderbilt, who was specifically kind of a hustle defensive player. You look at a Malik Beasley, who was very specifically a knockdown elite three-point shooter at the time. You bring in these players who can do very specific things and can put your young players in very viable positions to win. And so I think it is a little bit of both. But if I really had to pick one, it was probably Edwards' jump, because he did that in the second half of the 2020-21 season after Chris Finch was hired. He had a 40-point game alongside Karl Anthony Towns and showed some of those signs. But it really is, they're both very, very much so married together.
Yeah, and I think, Andrew, you're hitting on something really key to this whole discussion with the Vikings, is that, and it's really like this in any sport, right? It's, if you get your quarterback, then you go. If you get your superstar NBA player, then you go. You even see this in baseball sometimes. The Kansas City Royals found they had Bobby Witt Jr., five-tool elite shortstop. He's 23 years old, and he's taking the American League by storm. They went and got a bunch of ancillary pieces to build a better team this year, and right now they're in the playoff hunt for the first time in 8-9 years. And so you see that in all these sports where you get your guy and then you go for it. And going for it can take varying levels of aggression. But I think what the Timberwolves did, which is maybe a little bit more on the aggressive side, is pretty much as soon as they figured out that Anthony Edwards was going to be a number one option, they put the pedal down and they went. And it was sort of to the, criticism, for at least a year, they got a lot of criticism for that, of why are you rushing Edwards' timeline? He's 20 years old. He's 21 years old. Why are you forcing him into this position where he has to be the number one guy, or be the number 1A to Towns at the time? And why do you need to force him into this where you're not going to let him grow into maybe his potential in a more slow, controlled manner? But their gamble paid off. And in this same sort of way, we can look at this with the Vikings. The Vikings just drafted, hopefully, their quarterback of the future. Hopefully their Anthony Edwards in J.J. McCarthy. And obviously, this first year is going to be a little bit closer to the 2021 Timberwolves season, where you're not really sure what you have with your centerpiece. You hope that he turns into something. McCarthy might not even play a whole lot this year, but hopefully this can be, and Andrew, I think you termed it like this the other night when we were brainstorming for this episode, maybe this is a throwaway season for the Vikings, and maybe this is a season where you don't get to reap much of the benefit of this, high draft pick, hopefully the centerpiece for the franchise, but hopefully it lays the foundation for something.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, you look at that in the NFL too. Like, once you realize that you have the guy, you have a season where you might overachieve expectations, but in your heart of hearts that you're probably not going to end up winning a championship. And I think you saw that with a team like the Houston Texans last year, who thought maybe right off the bat that we might have the guy, but I mean, the expectations aren't incredibly high, and now you see them make the move for Diggs and maybe kind of go all in, and that's exactly what it was with Edwards. You had the throwaway season his rookie year in 2020, 21. I think even 21 and 22, the first year that they kind of returned to the playoffs since 27-18. That was still a little bit of a considered throwaway year because they were a good team and they were fun to watch, but nobody really thought that they were going to end up making any noise. It was just kind of a fun young team, and I think you were able to learn some things about that roster. But when you make the move for Rudy Gobert, that's really when you dig your heels in and you plant your flag. And so I think that's pretty much necessary in a lot of sports. And even, I mean, we talked about it briefly too with the Chiefs. You know, you have your throwaway season, and Patrick Mahomes starts your last game of the year, and you see some flashes, and maybe the next year it improves a little bit more, and then you really start to make your moves around your guys. So I think it's very true across all sports, except in the NFL it makes things a lot different, and it makes a lot of roster situations incomparable. Just because I think in the NFL you have your first round picks that are valued a little bit more than they would be in the NBA, and how they're kind of thrown around like candy in trades. And then too, just the hard cap, right? Like the hard cap makes things a lot different. The NBA is becoming a more and more pay to play league. Teams that are building their own arenas and making money off their deals, with live acts coming through and just kind of printing money for the franchise, are able to pay the taxes and keep the players. Like you see the Warriors as an example of that. The Clippers are going to be that pretty soon too. But the NFL's a hard cap, and one example is the team that's owned by the Brown family is more competitive than the team that's owned by the Walton family. So there's two very different things there that force you to come up with hypotheticals in different ways, I think.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the Chiefs in this discussion, because I think what's fascinating, and maybe from a national standpoint, because you got to remember, I've been a Timberwolves fan for all of like a month, and that's a very wavering fandom. Like that.
A lot of people, Jordan. Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah. And like I get a pass because like I'm not a big NBA guy. I like to watch the playoffs and I like to follow along and do all that stuff, but like I don't assign myself a team. I don't think I own a single NBA jersey. Like, it's basketball's cool. I like to play it sometimes. I can't dribble between my legs, but I can knock down a 3 or 2. So like, I don't know. Like, I like talking about the Chiefs and what they've done since they found the guy, because they found Patrick Mahomes and they almost immediately were like, all right, Tyreek Hill, goodbye. And they go like, they sign I've been trying to think of his name for like 20 minutes, and it's the safety Tyrann Mathieu. They go out and they get like a Tyrann Mathieu, and they are paying Chris Jones like really good money to be a really elite defensive player. And they really are like, okay, the guy is going to get it done on the offensive side of the ball. He's going to make magic out of whatever we give him. We need to have a really good defense. And they seem to have Spags. I don't know what doubt they have on him, but he never even sniffs coaching jobs elsewhere. Like, and so he's just a DC for life, I guess. And Spags does really amazing things with that defense, and it gets downplayed because of the fact that they have Patrick Mahomes. They have the guy. I think Rudy Gobert's impact and the bringing in of Rudy Gobert, it was tremendously undervalued. I mean, you would hear people talk about how like, oh yeah, this is like the best defense in the NBA. They kept saying that, but I feel like they didn't play up enough the fact that like it's the best defense in the NBA because of, I believe, the defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert. Like, he's massive, he's physical, and his only downside is, I guess, sorry guys, he can't guard Luka Doncic. And so like, I just think he's way undervalued from a fan, like an outside fan, maybe like a national media perspective, the same way that the Chiefs defense gets undervalued, when the Chiefs defense, especially lately, is the reason they win a lot of games. It's because they have, Trent McDuffie, and they have Chris Jones, and they have like a George Karlaftis coming around the edge, and it seems like they always have pass rusher rotation. They just have all these guys on defense, and again, it's not exactly apples to apples because 5-on-5 versus 11-on-11 with 22 starters in the NFL. But I think whenever you look at it that way, I think that's something that they're both undervalued, and they really shouldn't be. They really should be honed in on, focused on, and I think when trying to mimic the success, you should be trying to do that. I want to know, Will, this might be more of a you. I kind of want to get from both of you guys, like, Are you impressed with the Vikings taking that defensive stance this season? You know, they go and they draft Dallas Turner, they sign Van Ginkel, they sign Grenard, they sign Cushman, like they sign Cashman, whatever. They sign all these defensive players. Do you see that translating at a similar level as it did for the Wolves with trading for Gobert?
I love that question. Um, and I think you can actually make the Wolves parallel even back a couple of years before Gobert. It was the Pat Beverly acquisition going into that 21-22 season, where you sort of instilled a defensive culture into the Minnesota Timberwolves, something that was a foreign concept in this state for their basketball team. The football team was always sort of known for their defense, but the basketball team has never been known for their defense. Especially since Karl-Anthony Towns has been here, they've been I think as Dane Moore often puts it, they're a walk-in top 10 offense, but they, were always bottom third of the league when it came to defense. And the Patrick Beverly and then subsequently the Rudy Gobert acquisitions created this defensive culture that now permeates and will probably be here for quite some time, even beyond the Rudy Gobert, once he either leaves, retires, whatever. So to that point, on the Vikings side of things, I loved the moves this summer, not only for this year, because I think if you're even going to have any level of remote competition in 2024, you need to have a good defense with either Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy, a rookie playing quarterback. But also, you look at the contracts that these guys signed, Van Ginkel, Cashman, Grenard, they're all multi-year deals. They're not just a quick rental. There's no sort of tag in, tag out with these guys. They're here for at least, if I'm not mistaken, the bottom is 2 years, and then I think Grenard's here for 4 or something like that. And then obviously Dallas Turner, a rookie, he'll be here for 4 or 5 years. You're building a defense now so that they build that chemistry together, and then hopefully, as we're talking about this, once maybe your quarterback is ready to go, like really go next season, 2025, you've got a defense that has reps together, they build chemistry together, they have sweat equity, and then, they get more comfortable with that Brian Flores concept, and then you're really ready to hit the ground running as a collective unit. And then, thinking, long down the road in the Chiefs sort of vein, if you do end up getting McCarthy to be a guy who's, going to be the guy for a while and he ends up getting paid, you will have younger guys that can then usher in the next group of, Vikings draft picks, et cetera, on defense. So long way of answering your question, but I love the comparison to the Gobert trade because I think it's really pertinent and instilling this defensive culture where it's maybe a little bit reverse psychology. So I love it. I love the moves they made this summer. Andrew, what are your thoughts on kind of that, defense first approach that the Vikings took this offseason?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea, and I think the comparison to Gobert is really smart, just because I think at a 10,000-foot view, I think you have to look at kind of parallel the rosters. Just the way the hard cap makes it out to be, you have to kind of compare the rosters in the way of the defense being Rudy Gobert, Justin Jefferson being Karl-Anthony Towns, and JJ being Anthony Edwards, right? Like, this works if JJ McCarthy pans out and you give him, you kind of eventually have to get to the point of having to choose between having a top tier invested in defense and probably Justin Jefferson at some point in time. And like the Justin Jefferson thing, similar to the Karl-Anthony Towns comparison, again, I want to caveat this with Justin Jefferson is way better in his sport than Karl-Anthony Towns is. This is very much so just for a roster construction hypothetical. But when you look at it from a 10,000-foot view, yes, Karl-Anthony Towns makes a ton of sense next to Anthony Edwards as a pick and pop player, one of the best 3-point shooters in the league. And that's the logical player that you keep alongside him. Same with a top tier wide receiver in the NFL. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense to keep him around with said franchise quarterback. However, sometimes that's just not the way that that mother cap ends up working out. So you're going to have to choose between those guys down the line, and I think that's where the Wolves are going to end up finding themselves as well. Because if next season there's a there's a non-Western Conference Finals run, I think there's going to be some pretty hefty questions that are asked of the roster. And one of those two players is probably going to be finding a new home. So yes, I like the comparison of Gobert to the invested in defense very much so. And I think obviously we saw it with the Chiefs. That was kind of the route they took with letting Tyreek Hill walk as well. So they kind of had to make that choice as well.
I think it's important to remember that, you know, it was an easy decision for the Chiefs because they had the best tight end in football and they had like a top 3 wide receiver. And that it makes it really easy whenever you can just say, like, would we rather pay a weapon $17 million a season or $35 million a season? 30, I can't remember what exactly Tyreek makes, but like mid-30s. And so it makes it pretty easy to be like, we will keep the tight end and pay half the money and then try to supplement Tyreek Hill with a, Marquez Valdez-Scantling or a Rashee Rice, whoever it is, because you trust Mahomes is just going to make those guys. And so I think the Vikings are actually going to have a really difficult discussion in 2028. I guess would be when the extension talks begin, because it suddenly becomes, oh, shucks, we're paying Justin Jefferson a lot of money, and he's going to be due a second contract here in a little bit, and he's getting close to that age 30, spot. Do we talk to Jordan Addison? Have you talked to him already at that point about, like, hey, we're going to make you a decently high paid receiver, but, like, it's going to be, like, maybe the top 10, probably not the top 10? Oh, at that point, are you saying, we've done it before, we'll do it again, trade the best receiver in football, draft the replacement, and who knows, we might just find a half-decent replacement coming out of Mankato State who was selling dental insurance or something, and he'll play special teams for a few years, and then he'll end up, winning over the fans' hearts. And so I think the Vikings have a really interesting, that's going to be an interesting fork in the road. I hope they win a championship before that point comes.
I thought with the whole trade the best receiver in the league thing, I thought you were going Troy Williamson for a while there, and I got a little worried.
I had to kind of cut out because we traded Moss, and then nothing happened, and then we had Diggs and Thielen, and that's how a lot of fans think about it, I think, because they're like, oh, we always get really good receivers, and it's like, I mean, after Moss, who was the next, like, good receiver? It was like, what, Sidney Rice for a couple of seasons?
Halvin?
Yeah, Berrien. Yeah. We had Halvin, but Halvin was less of, like, I don't know, he was a good receiver, but he was more of like that, like, gadget. He was more of like a Debo than he was, Jefferson. Like, he was more of a just get the ball in his hands and see what happens kind of guy. And so I don't think you can depend on that all the time. But yeah, there's definitely like, there's like a 15-year period there where it's like, don't talk about receivers,
Hank Basket, anyone?
Yeah, Hank Basket.
So I want to touch on something you said there, Jordan. I think it's really interesting because there's this idea of, do you look at Justin Jefferson as your Tyreek Hill, or do you look at him as your Travis Kelce in this, pie in the sky scenario? And I think the Bengals are probably going to give us a snapshot of this next year when they decide what they're doing with Jamar Chase, because they're going to sort of tell people whether or not it's feasible to pay top money for a quarterback and top money for a wide receiver.
Absolutely.
And obviously, we're hoping here. We're hoping that J.J. McCarthy turns into Joe Burrow or better or whatever. But that's obviously the goal. So I think that's going to be a data point that the Vikings can look at, 2025 summer. What do the Bengals do? And then also subsequently, how do they do after that point? Do the Bengals peter off because they can't pay anybody else? Or do they still have the ability to maintain a level of excellence because those two guys are just that good?
Yeah. I want to play the game because we've already started doing it here, Andrew, and we've already done. So we've said Anthony Edwards is going to, JJ McCarthy's going to have to be Ant-Man, which is already like, Man, that feels like big shoes to fill for Minnesota sports fans.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that's tough. In the opposite direction, we've said that Justin Jefferson, who might be the greatest Vikings wide receiver to ever lace up a pair of cleats, he's now Karl Anthony Towns, who has mixed reviews on Yelp.com, and so that feels a little weird. But I get it. I understand why that's the comp. I want to know. And this is for both of you guys, because I don't know the Timberwolves roster nearly as well as the two of you. Who is the I'm just gonna start hitting you with them, and we can keep it brief because I want to do 6 players. So, who is the Vikings' Jaden McDaniels? I put you on the spot. I'm so sorry.
Probably. I think it's probably Jordan Addison.
Okay.
Because Jordan Addison is going to end up kind of being in that ballpark in terms of proportion of salary that you're going to have to pay him. Like, you don't know if he's going to be a top tier receiver extension. It's obviously 1 year in. This is all speculation. But Jaden McDaniels signed a relatively team friendly deal, even though he's getting $25 million a year. But he's still one of the more effective young players, and people see him as being the wingman in the future to Ant-Man. And so I would say that that's probably a fair comparison to Jordan Addison at this point. Again, not knowing what his second contract or if his second contract looks.
Will, who do you think that Jaden McDaniels is?
I was gonna say the same thing, honestly. Yeah, I think it has to be probably Addison, especially if we're looking at this from the perspective of trying to build a Vikings offense that has enough talent around a superstar. Again, hoping JJ McCarthy becomes that, but maybe someone who doesn't necessarily also demand the top dollar. So I like Andrew's answer. I can take the next one.
I can see Darisaw too, honestly, for McDaniels. I think that could be kind of an interesting comp there as well.
I think O'Neal might be a good, because Darisaw, I still think I'm waiting to see if he's going to be he might be a top 3 tackle in the league, and I don't know that Jaden McDaniels is ever going to be considered top 3. He's a really good player, but I don't know that he's that level, and so I think Brian O'Neal might even be a really good fit, because he's I don't know that Brian O'Neal's a top 3 right tackle in the league, but I think he's top 10 easily, and I think he's very consistent, and that's really all Vikings fans wanted to see. I want to start this 100%. One off. I want to throw Mike Conley out there, and I'm saying Harrison Smith for Mike Conley because they're both old and they provide veteran leadership that is invaluable to a young team. Look at me, I know my NBA things. All right, we'll let you kick off. Who is the Mike Conley of this team? I also had to say Harrison Smith because we can't just do all offensive players. We have to throw the defense some bones here. So,
I'm gonna be a little bit off the beaten path a little bit. I'm gonna go Garrett Bradbury.
All right.
Not because of age and necessarily wisdom, but because of the fact that he commands the offense similarly to how Mike Conley does. Yes, you would hope your point guard is more synonymous with your quarterback, but since the Vikings sort of have this sinkhole at quarterback right now, you can't really have that as an answer. So Garrett Bradbury, despite his flaws, despite his, struggles pass protecting against Chris Jones and the like, he is and always has been regarded as a very intelligent center and someone who keeps that offensive line as a cohesive unit very well. And you saw that with the Timberwolves this season, right? When Conley would go off the floor, the offense would kind of turn to mush for a few minutes. And so Conley's not going to do anything sexy. He's not going to put on much of a highlight reel of any. And nonetheless, he's going to be sort of the engine that drives the offense, similar to how an important and well-performing center does, which for all his flaws, I think Bradbury does a pretty good job of.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, who do you think the Mike Conley of the Minnesota Vikings is?
I'm wondering if it could maybe be Aaron Jones.
That's
simply
because
they're both veterans that I think provide a lot of utility in what they're doing. They're not making 765 an hour. Like they're not veteran minimum guys. And I also think too, if JJ, like, it's been talked about that Mike Conley and along with Ricky Rubio before, but they've been crucial with Anthony Edwards, both off the floor and on the floor, and taking playmaking pressure off of him, and making him not be the point guard all the time. If JJ McCarthy finds himself in a game, I think he's probably going to need some help from Aaron Jones, whether it be in both the run game or the pass game. So I think maybe Aaron Jones.
I want to change my answer now. I want to change my answer to Blake Cashman because I feel like that like veteran defensive leadership. Because Harrison Smith is like homegrown, so like I feel like Conley has to be a guy that is like he's a mercenary. He's an old guy that's come into this team to drag these youngins along. So maybe I go with like Blake Cashman, who's gonna let Ivan Pace take that next step, and he might be wearing the green dot. Who knows what's gonna happen? So we already did, like I said, we already did Ant and Cat. I will say Gobert is the entire defense. But if you guys want to give two players for Rudy Gobert, he's very tall and very lanky. So if you would like to give two guys for Rudy Gobert, go ahead. And then we've completed the starting five. We'll do a Naz Reid. Naz Reid's baller as hell. I love Naz Reid. There was somebody at WrestleMania this year that's had a Fui Naz Reid sign up. It was awesome. I was like, I know who that is. He plays for the T-Wolves. He's really good. So we'll do Naz Reid after this. Who's the Rudy Gobert of the Vikings?
Brian Flores.
Oh, heck yeah. Just going with the coach.
It's just simple. Rudy Gobert runs the defense. Brian Flores runs the defense.
Do you have a player? I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have a player? This is a very specific question. Do you have a player that you think could win Defensive Player of the Year on the Vikings, like either this year or next year? I'll leave next year in there in case you do want to say like you're that high on Tono.
I kind of want to say Ivan Pace.
Oh, heck yes.
I think that's really aggressive for a 5'11" linebacker, but I think if there's anybody on the Vikings who has the motor and the just give a shit factor to win Defensive Player of the Year, I think it could be him.
He is going to be wearing number 0, and he will have, similar to Rudy Gobert, who has like the height advantage. Pace is the opposite. I shouldn't have said similar. He's the opposite. He's show. He's little, but I think that will make him stand out in the public's eye as like, look at this little linebacker that's doing all these great things, and that could help elevate him into that. I love that answer. Andrew, we'll come back to you for the Gobert comp.
I think with Gobert's role being his main thing, cleaning up the mess that the players in front of him, and maybe making them look a little bit better on defense than they actually are, type of thing that he has going on. I think it could be two position groups, being either the edge rushers or the group of safeties, finding ways to mop up what other maybe lackadaisical areas on the field are leaving in front of them, and
How about
making
just all,
the defense
like,
in general
10 of
look a
those
lot
guys
better.
Together? All 10 of
Every single one.
Those guys make up Rudy Gobert. All 6 safeties and 4 edge rushers. No, I like that comp.
That could probably be a pretty good, that on 10 guys, Rudy Gobert. I've heard worse.
I love it. So who are we going to say is the Naz Reid? And I know this is difficult because you don't get the same level of like bench play out of the NFL. So in my mind, I'm thinking a rotational pass rusher or Ty Chandler. Because Ty Chandler's probably not going to stout many games, but he will be important to the game. Maybe also, I feel like you could make, like, if you had the time and the wordsmanship, you could probably do CJ Ham in this role of, like, he's not going to be in every play. He's really important to the run game, picking up, there's that whole vibe. We'll start with you. You know what? Let's start with Andrew. Are you okay if we start with you? I don't want to put you on the spot. You're our guest.
Well, I think I need to rack my brain a little more for current roster, but I think like 2021 Adam Thielen is pretty close to what Naz Reid is, like pretty useful to the team, like very much so. the national TV narrative anytime they play a game. Like, hey, did you hear he's from Minnesota? Did you hear he was an open tryout? Did you hear he was actually going to be a dentist if this didn't work out? Like, hey, everyone has Nas Reed sign in front of their pizza place now. Like, look at all these tattoos, like Nas Reed towels, like all that stuff. Like, you get the full gambit. I'd have to rack my brain for current roster.
Why is he so popular? Is it just because he's a sixth man?
Honestly, I can't even explain why he's so popular. Like, it's been since his rookie year. Like, he's just like his game is so interesting. Like, he started out like he wasn't in great playing shape. Like, he was a little big for a 6'9" center. Like, he was kind of odd. Like, he's like an odd size for an NBA center. So people just kind of loved it because he was a grinder, and like he just worked super hard and polished his game up. And like he was like very, like, any NBA scout at the time would tell you, like, he's very plenty skilled, but he just has an odd body to be a center. Like, he's 6'9" and not a great mover.
Yeah.
But it worked.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't some, like, Nas Reed saves family of kittens from, like, house fire while also, dunking on 7 foot tall, something like, I don't know, throw in some, like, Russia versus America Olympic angle, like, just get all of the good stories. And I wanted to make sure there wasn't something I was missing, and it was just kind of like he's not supposed to be good, and he is, and we love that. That's the American dream or whatever. So we'll go to you for current roster. We'll let Andrew rack his brain a little bit, try and find a current roster, but I do love the 2021 Adam Thielen comp.
Yeah, I think the Adam Thielen thing is great too, and I don't even think you mentioned this piece just because he was also undrafted, just like Nas Reed was undrafted.
Yeah.
And so there's that sort of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, hero origin story. And I also just think, frankly, the name Nas Reed is just so unique that you hear it and you kind of just can't get it out of your head. So to me, though, the Nas Reed award for the Vikings goes to Josh Metellus. I think the hard workmanship thing fits right in there with Josh Metellus. He was never supposed to be anybody. He was practice squad. Got cut his rookie year, made it back to the practice squad, then was just, all he ever did was special teams, and he became a special teams ace, figured that out, mastered that, and then sort of rose his way into this place where he became a prominent contributor to a team, and no one really saw it coming. And then once it happened, everyone just kind of realized, like, oh yeah, this makes sense. He's awesome. Just like with Nas Reed, where he signs this contract extension last summer, similar to how Josh Metellus signed a contract extension last summer. And both were sort of surprises, but also then once they happened, no one batted an eye, because of the fit for the team and the contributions and all that. So they also both have the same hair. So there's that piece too.
Nas Metellus is a much cooler name than Nas Reed or Josh Metellus. So, like, that we should talk to them about a marriage.
And then Josh Reed is just incredibly lame.
Josh Reed does my taxes. But Nas Metellus is a 5-star Olympian in everything. He won the World Series of Poker. He plays, for the Chiefs. Like, he's got multiple, that's just a cool name. But all right, Andrew, we're coming back to you.
I'm going to go with CJ Ham. I think there's a little bit of a cult figure there. Like, he's really good at his job. I think there's kind of two factors to it. I think Nas Reed is like maybe a little bit more safe on his respective roster than CJ Ham typically is from season to season. But like, all-time good guy, fans love him. It's not even really the same comparison for roster building purposes either, just because I think they're just so different in terms of the grand scheme of things. But I just think like their whole position with the fan bases is pretty similar. When CJ Ham makes a great play, everyone's just like, heck yeah! Like, there's not a single person that's disappointed about it. Same with Nas Reed. When he makes the 3-pointer, everyone's just like, Nas Reed. That's just how it goes.
And it's kind of crazy because when Nas Reed was in the game during the playoffs, he would pull up and I'd be like, yeah, that's going in. And like, I was just like, there was like a confidence, and it's the same confidence I have like when CJ Ham gets his hands on the ball. If he's got a one-on-one, I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. Like he's gonna lower the shoulder. He's all at it. He's like, I know he's taller than. He's like 5'5", 320. He's not. Those aren't his dimensions at all. But that's what it is in my head. And so he's just he's like a bowling ball. And so I remember seeing him play like a traditional halfback role instead of the fullback role in the preseason in Cincinnati. Went to the game and got to watch the Vikings play, and it was a couple weeks before Teddy blew his knee and everything. But I remember watching CJ Ham was the running back for a lot of that game, and so I remember watching that and just being like, "Is this guy like? Is he going to be our new running back?" And then they were like, "Well, he's going to be a fullback," and I was like, "I'm okay with that too," because the way he was running the ball, it was not. He wasn't running away from anybody. He was like attacking UPS drivers out there. So it was pretty fun. Really quick, I'm going to bounce my final thoughts off. I have really quick final thoughts tonight, and it's just the NBA draft is tonight. I know that's very exciting for Andrew, and so I want to make these super brief. Shop Unified, follow the show at LTB Vikings, and follow Will at Will Bad Lose, and check out the Bad Loser blog and VikingsTerritory.com. Final thoughts are just simple as this. I want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl, and I would like for it to happen soon. I don't really have any final thoughts. It's the end of June. I'm in golf mode. It's a different story. Andrew, we will pass it to you. We'll let you get your final thoughts in. It doesn't have to be about football. I have to stress that. Every time we have Dustin on, I say you can talk about anything, and then he always talks about football. So you can talk about whatever you want. Make sure you plug where people can find you on social media, where you write, where you do all your things. Make sure to plug yourself nice and good. But other than that, the floor is yours.
Yeah, not much for me. Not much for me tonight. I think it's a fun exercise always to go between sports, just because even though there is not a ton of parallels between really any of them, there really always are, because at the end of the day, there's very similar decision making that goes on, whether good or bad. And so this is always a fun exercise to do. And also, speaking of tonight, the Wolves made a pickup for into the top 10 to get Rob Dillingham out of Kentucky, which I guess would further the narrative of going all in, spending a 2031 draft selection. So Minnesota Vikings, if you are wanting to be competitive now, maybe look into the 2030s for first round picks that you would like to trade.
It's unprotected. They gave up too much. They should have protected that 2031 first round pick. I think my daughter will be eligible for that draft.
And I just want a quick plug too for Andrew. You can find him on the X Machine, formerly known as Twitter, at Andrew_Carlson2. He writes for Canis Hoopus, like we talked about at the top of the show. He writes awesome stuff. He fully convinced me that we need to go get Tyler Kolek in the draft tonight. Probably not going to happen now that we have Rob Dillingham, but you never know. We do need point guards.
Ain't over till it's over.
We still got a couple more nights of this. So I think that's it from Andrew. It was great having you. Thank you for talking some ball with us. We'd love to have you back, whether that's just to talk football, whether to do another one of these mashup episodes next summer, whatever it might be. My final thoughts are simply read Andrew. Read Andrew's work. He puts out awesome stuff at Canis. I followed him closely throughout the playoffs, read his game stories. His draft stuff last week was awesome. Give him a read. It's good stuff. The guys over at Canis have put out really good work. I think really in general, the Timberwolves in this media market have a really good group of people writing, blogging, podcasting about them. It's one of the best sort of NBA media markets, I think. I'm biased, but we have a lot of good folks around here. National names that you probably know: John Krasinski of The Athletic, Dane Moore of his own Dane Moore podcast. Good writers and podcasters. So go read, go listen. But also, like Jordan said, let's get a championship, and hopefully this exercise, is maybe the start of that. We get a couple championships out of these two franchises. For us, at Load the Box, plus Andrew, we'll talk to you soon. We don't know if it's going to be next week. We don't know if it's going to be training camp. I don't know. Just check your podcast feed. Skol, y'all.